Put your hands where I can see them, ma'am.
Easy, officer. I'm a special agent with the FBI.
Her FBI badge meant nothing to the racist cop who saw her not as a federal agent, but as a jewelry thief simply for being a black woman in an affluent neighborhood. That officer's blatant abuse of power, captured by a dozen cell phone cameras, would cost him his career and his city over $2 million. If you believe that no one is above the law, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. This is a story about how prejudice can blind those sworn to protect, but also how courage and accountability can prevail. Special Agent Maya Evans felt the familiar, quiet satisfaction that settled in after a long but productive day. At 41, with 15 years of decorated service in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, she had built a career dismantling the very organized crime rings that preyed on the wealthy. Her task force specialized in complex, high-value theft, a world of intricate planning and shadowy networks. Walking down the bustling downtown street, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows between skyscrapers, she was just another professional heading home. Her calm demeanor and sharp analytical mind had served her well, helping her navigate the often treacherous currents of being a black woman in a field dominated by white men. She believed deeply in the rule of law, but her years of experience had taught her that the system's application of that law was often flawed, tainted by the very biases she fought to overcome every single day. The city hummed with the energy of commerce and ambition. The street was a canyon of glass and steel, home to corporate headquarters, luxury boutiques, and chic cafes where deals were made over expensive coffee. The air was cool, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and the murmur of conversations from the diverse crowd of pedestrians hurrying along the sidewalks. Maya blended in seamlessly, her professional attire, a tailored navy blue pantsuit and sensible heels, marking her as one of the thousands of white-collar workers emptying out of the nearby office buildings. She was thinking about what to make for dinner, her mind a world away from the dangers of her job, enjoying the simple anonymity of the urban rush hour as she made her way toward the subway station, just a few blocks away. Officer David Miller saw the world differently. From the driver's seat of his patrol car, he didn't see a vibrant, diverse metropolis. He saw a landscape of threats and anomalies, filtered through the lens of his own ingrained prejudices. A 12-year veteran of the city's police department, Miller had amassed a troubling, yet officially unpunished, record of complaints for racial profiling. His pattern was consistent, targeting black individuals in wealthy neighborhoods, justifying his stops with vague claims of suspicious behavior. He was known for his aggressive, escalatory tactics, a bully with a badge who saw disrespect in any challenge to his authority. He cruised slowly, his gaze sweeping over the pedestrians, not as a protector, but as a predator hunting for anyone who, in his mind, didn't belong. His eyes landed on Maya Evans. He saw a black woman walking with purpose in a high-end district, and his internal calculus of suspicion instantly activated. A series of recent jewelry heists in the area had put the department on edge, and the profile of the suspect was frustratingly vague. But for Officer Miller, the profile was simple, someone who looked out of place. In his biased worldview, Maya fit that description perfectly. He didn't see the confidence of a seasoned federal agent or the fatigue of a professional after a hard day's work. He saw a target. He ignored the dozens of other people on the street, his focus narrowing on her with an unnerving intensity, his mind already constructing a narrative of guilt based on nothing more than the color of her skin. The sudden screech of tires pulling to the curb cut through the ambient noise of the city, causing several pedestrians to turn their heads. Officer Miller's patrol car had stopped abruptly, angled sharply toward the sidewalk just a few feet ahead of where Maya was walking. He emerged from the vehicle with a deliberate, intimidating slowness, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. His expression was a mask of unearned authority, his eyes cold and accusatory. Maya stopped, her years of training kicking in, a wave of caution washing over the calm she had felt just moments before. She assessed the situation instantly, an aggressive officer, a public space, and a confrontation she hadn't invited. He strode directly toward her, closing the distance with an imposing posture meant to assert dominance before a single word was spoken. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice laced with an immediate, unprovoked hostility. The question was not an inquiry, it was an accusation. Maya met his gaze, her own expression remaining neutral despite the surge of adrenaline. "I'm on my way home, officer," she replied, her tone even and respectful. "My office is just a few blocks away in the federal building." She offered the information freely, a standard de-escalation tactic designed to provide a logical explanation and diffuse any potential misunderstanding. But her calm, direct answer seemed only to fuel his suspicion. He scoffed, a smirk twisting his lips. "The federal building? Right. I think you're the one we've been looking for in connection with those jewelry thefts." The accusation hung in the air, a stunning and baseless leap from a simple question to a serious criminal allegation. Maya felt a familiar, sickening knot tighten in her stomach, the feeling of being presumed guilty for no reason. This was not a misunderstanding. This was targeted harassment. The people on the sidewalk began to slow their pace, their curiosity piqued by the escalating confrontation. Do you think a police department should be held liable when it ignores an officer's repeated history of profiling complaints? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Maya knew this situation was spiraling dangerously. This officer wasn't interested in the truth. He was operating on a pre-written script of prejudice, and she had been cast as the villain. The moment for simple explanations was over. He had made his decision, and now she would have to react. With a deep, centering breath, Maya Evans accessed the part of her mind reserved for high-stakes encounters. This wasn't a negotiation with a hardened criminal. It was a confrontation with a uniformed bigot. But the principles of control and de-escalation remain the same. "Officer, I can assure you that's not the case," she said, her voice a study in calm professionalism. She deliberately moved her hand slowly toward her shoulder bag, a gesture intended to be non-threatening. "I understand you're on high alert due to recent events, but I am a federal law enforcement officer. I can show you my credentials, and we can clear this up right now." She was offering him a way out, a chance to retreat from his baseless accusation without losing face. She held his gaze, trying to convey a shared professional identity, hoping to find a flicker of reason behind his aggressive facade. It was a calculated risk, but a necessary one to prevent the situation from deteriorating further in the middle of a crowded public street. Officer Miller watched her movement with a predatory stillness, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. He saw her calm demeanor not as a sign of innocence, but as the calculated poise of a con artist. "Credentials? Everyone's got credentials these days," he sneered, his tone dripping with contempt. Still, Maya proceeded, her movements measured and precise. She retrieved a small black leather wallet from her bag. Flipping it open, she presented it to him. Inside, nestled in custom-cut leather, was a gleaming gold FBI badge, its eagle and shield catching the afternoon light. Beside it, her official identification card sat under a clear plastic window, her photograph clear and professional, her name and title, Special Agent Maya Evans, printed in stark official lettering. "Here you are, officer," she stated, holding it steady for his inspection. "You can run my name. My credentials are verifiable." The weight of the badge, a symbol of her life's work and dedication, felt heavier than ever in that moment of public humiliation. He glanced at the credentials for less than a second, a dismissive flick of his eyes that was more insulting than any word he could have spoken. A humorless, ugly laugh escaped his lips. "An FBI agent? You? That's a good one. That thing looks like something you bought online." The accusation of forgery was a slap in the face, a complete and utter rejection of her reality. He refused to even entertain the possibility that a black woman could hold such a position of authority. For Miller, the world was simple. She was in the wrong place, therefore she was in the wrong. Her identity, her career, her entire life's achievements were irrelevant, erased by his prejudice. The crowd of onlookers was growing, their phones now raised, a silent chorus of digital witnesses capturing the officer's blatant refusal to accept the truth laid bare before him. A cold fury, sharp and focused, began to burn beneath Maya's composed exterior. 15 years of service, of navigating covert operations, of facing down dangerous criminals, and this was where her authority ended? On a downtown sidewalk at the whim of a patrolman blinded by hate. She felt the stares of the crowd, a mixture of pity, outrage, and morbid curiosity. The humiliation was a physical sensation, a hot flush spreading across her skin. But her training held firm. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Officer Miller," she said, reading the name from his badge, her voice dropping to a lower, more serious register. "I am advising you to take my credentials, return to your vehicle, and contact your supervisor. You are making a grave mistake, and you are obstructing a federal agent." She was no longer asking, she was warning him, invoking the hierarchy of law enforcement he was so flagrantly disregarding. Her assertion of authority was like gasoline on a fire. Miller's face contorted with rage. He saw her warning not as a professional courtesy, but a direct challenge to his power. "Obstruction? Now you're impersonating a federal officer. That's a felony," he snarled, taking a menacing step forward, invading her personal space. "You think you can come into my city, in my district, and flash a fake badge at me?" The irony was staggering. He was accusing her of the very deception he was perpetrating by refusing to perform the most basic function of his job, verifying facts. His entire case against her was built on a foundation of his own racist assumptions, and every piece of evidence to the contrary only made him dig in deeper. When a police officer chooses to believe their own prejudice over official, verifiable identification, should that be considered a fireable offense on the first instance? Let us know what you think in the comments. The dynamic shifted irrevocably. The possibility of a peaceful resolution vanished, replaced by the grim certainty of escalation. Miller reached for his radio, his voice barking into the receiver. "Dispatch, I need backup at 5th and Main. I have a possible suspect in the jewelry heists. Female, black, attempting to impersonate a federal officer. She's becoming hostile." The word hostile was a deliberate, poisonous lie designed to justify what he was about to do. Maya stood her ground, her body rigid with disbelief and a tightly controlled anger. She watched as he unhooked his handcuffs from his belt, the metallic click echoing in the sudden quiet of the onlookers. He was creating a narrative for the record, painting her as the aggressor to cover for his own misconduct. She knew this script well. She had seen it play out in countless civil rights cases. "Turn around and put your hands behind you back," Miller commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep with bruising force. The physical contact was a jolt, a profound violation that shattered her professional composure. In that instant, she was no longer Special Agent Evans. She was just another black body being subjected to the brute force of a state-sanctioned aggressor. The crowd gasped audibly, a collective intake of breath at the sight of the officer physically manhandling the well-dressed woman who had been nothing but calm and respectful. Her mind raced, weighing her options. Resisting would only feed his narrative of hostility and could get her seriously hurt. Complying felt like a surrender to the very injustice she had dedicated her life to fighting. With a heavy heart and a mind already calculating the legal battle to come, Maya made the only choice that ensured her survival. She did not struggle. She allowed him to spin her around, the fabric of her suit jacket twisting uncomfortably. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs closed around her wrists, biting into her skin. The clicking of the locks was a sound of finality, a sound that sealed her humiliation in front of dozens of strangers and their recording cell phones. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller began, his voice smug with victory as he recited the Miranda warning. But Maya wasn't listening to the words. She was listening to the sounds of the city, the distant sirens of the backup he had called, and the quiet, furious promise she was making to herself. Officer David Miller would be held accountable for this. His badge would not protect him from the consequences of his actions. The cold steel of the handcuffs was a brutal shock to her system, a chilling symbol of her powerlessness in this moment. A wave of white-hot fury surged through Maya, but her training, honed over 15 years of high-pressure situations, smothered it with an icy calm. She made a split-second decision, a strategic choice born of survival and foresight. Physical resistance was futile. It would only validate Miller's false narrative of a hostile suspect and risk serious injury. Instead, she shifted her focus from de-escalation to documentation. Her mind became a recording device of its own, cataloging every detail: the painful tightness of the cuffs, the exact phrasing of Miller's commands, the shocked faces in the crowd, and the multiple smartphone lenses glinting in the afternoon sun. She would endure this humiliation, but she would ensure it was his last. With a rough shove, Officer Miller propelled her toward the patrol car. He snatched her shoulder bag with such force that the strap dug into her neck before snapping free. Contemptuously, he upended the bag onto the hood of his vehicle, its contents spilling out in a chaotic, deeply personal display. Her wallet, keys, a neatly organized case of business cards, a spare magazine for her service weapon, and her personal cell phone skittered across the painted metal. The sight of the FBI-issued magazine, a tool of her trade, lying exposed next to a tube of lipstick felt like a profound violation, a deliberate desecration of her professional identity. He was not just arresting her, he was publicly dissecting her life, piece by piece, reducing her from a decorated agent to a collection of suspicious objects under the gaze of a dozen strangers. The crowd's murmurs grew into vocal protests. "Hey, leave her alone. She told you who she was," a man shouted from the sidewalk. "We're all filming this, you know," a young woman added, holding her phone up defiantly. Miller, deaf to their warnings, was lost in his own power trip. He picked up Maya's credentials again, sneering at them before tossing them back onto the hood. Then he grabbed her personal phone and began swiping at the screen, a flagrant and illegal attempt to search it without a warrant. Finding it locked, he threw it down in frustration. Maya's voice cut through the noise, steady and clear, pitched to be audible to every recording device. "Officer Miller, you are conducting an illegal search of my property." For the record, I have identified myself as Special Agent Maya Evans of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. His search became a frantic, pointless violation. He rifled through her wallet, pulling out credit cards and her driver's license, holding them up one by one as if they were exhibits in the sham trial he was conducting on the street. The mundane artifacts of her life, a library card, a health insurance card, a faded photograph of her younger sister, were put on public display, each one scrutinized with suspicion. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on her as he inspected every item, searching for anything to justify his bigotry. He found nothing, of course, and the absence of any evidence only seemed to enrage him further. He was a man confronted with the truth of his own profound error, and his only response was to double down on the lie, to punish her for his own mistake. The wail of approaching sirens grew louder, and two more patrol cars screeched to a halt, boxing in the scene. A sergeant and a younger officer emerged, their expressions hardening as they took in the spectacle. A crowd of angry, phone-wielding civilians, a visibly agitated Officer Miller, and a well-dressed black woman in handcuffs. Miller immediately launched into his defense, his voice strained and high-pitched. "Sarge, I got her. This is the one from the jewelry heists. She's got a fake FBI badge, trying to impersonate a federal officer. She became aggressive." Maya seized the opportunity, addressing the sergeant directly, her tone professional and unwavering. "Sergeant, my name is Special Agent Maya Evans. My credentials, badge, and FBI-issued firearm magazine are on the hood of that vehicle. I have complied with all lawful orders. I request that you contact my supervisor at the FBI field office immediately to verify my identity." The sergeant, an older man with weary eyes, looked from Maya to Miller, then to the undeniable evidence spread across the car's hood. He saw the gleaming gold badge, the official ID, and the sea of cell phones still recording. A flicker of understanding and alarm crossed his face. He knew Miller's reputation. He knew what this looked like, and he knew what a monumental disaster it was rapidly becoming. But Miller was his officer, and the instinct to close ranks was strong. Before the sergeant could make a decision, Miller, sensing his authority slipping away, barked, "She's a liar! Get her in the car now!" The sergeant hesitated for a critical second, a moment of indecision that would later be dissected by internal affairs investigators. In that moment, he chose loyalty to a bad cop over the law he was sworn to uphold. He nodded curtly to the younger officer. They moved toward Maya, their movements more hesitant and professional than Miller's had been. As the younger officer gently placed a hand on her back to guide her into the rear of the patrol car, she squared her shoulders and spoke one last time, her voice ringing with clarity for every camera and every witness. "This is an unlawful arrest. My name is Special Agent Maya Evans, Federal Bureau of Investigation, badge number 734. The heavy car door slammed shut, the sound echoing with a grim finality. She was now a prisoner, encased in the cramped, sterile back seat. Through the reinforced glass, she watched the world outside, the faces of the crowd, a mixture of anger and disbelief, the flashing lights painting the scene in strobes of red and blue, and the smug, triumphant face of Officer David Miller. The humiliation was complete, but so was the evidence. He had just arrested a federal agent on a crowded street for the crime of being black, and the entire world was about to see it. Inside the stifling confines of the patrol car, Maya Evans controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate with the practiced discipline of an agent who had faced down armed fugitives. The world outside the smudged window was a distorted tableau of flashing lights and concerned faces. She watched as the sergeant, a man whose name she didn't know but whose face was now etched in her memory, finally seemed to grasp the precipice on which his department was teetering. The sea of smartphones, all still recording, formed a digital jury that he could no longer ignore. He turned away from Miller's sputtering justifications and spoke into his radio, his voice a low, urgent murmur. Maya couldn't make out the words, but she knew their import. He was finally doing what he should have done 10 minutes ago, verifying her identity. Officer Miller paced beside the car, his agitation palpable, a man realizing the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. The sergeant stood with the radio pressed to his ear, his back to the crowd, creating a small, futile bubble of privacy in a situation that was now spectacularly public. The air crackled with a tense silence, broken only by the hum of idling engines and the distant city traffic. Miller attempted to interject. "Sarge, she's a con artist, I'm telling you." But the sergeant silenced him with a sharp, cutting gesture of his hand, a clear sign that Miller's credibility had evaporated. Maya watched the sergeant's face, seeing the subtle tensing of his jaw as he listened to the voice on the other end of the radio. He was no longer a colleague protecting one of his own. He was an officer of the law receiving official information, and the institutional weight of that information was about to crash down on them all. Every second that passed felt like an hour, a slow-motion unraveling of Miller's fabricated reality. Then, the static-laced confirmation crackled from the radio, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Dispatch to Sergeant Peterson. Be advised, subject is confirmed. Evans, Maya. Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Badge number 734. Active duty, assigned to the Organized Crime Task Force at the Federal Plaza. Supervisor has been notified and is en route to your location." The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow to Officer Miller's narrative of lies. The sergeant's face went pale, his expression a mixture of dread and fury. He looked over at Maya, who met his gaze through the window with an unblinking, cold stare. The younger officer standing nearby looked down at his boots, a flush of shame creeping up his neck. Miller simply froze, his mouth slightly agape, the color draining from his face as the full, catastrophic weight of his actions finally landed on him. With a speed that conveyed pure panic, the younger officer was at the car door, fumbling with the keys to unlock it. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," he mumbled as the door swung open. Maya stepped out, her movements deliberate and stiff, the circulation slowly returning to her wrists. Sergeant Peterson approached her, his posture now deferential, his tone stripped of all authority. "Agent Evans," he began, his voice strained, "on behalf of this department, I apologize. This should never have happened. There was a profound error in judgment." The apology was hollow, a corporate-sounding script for a deeply personal violation. Maya simply nodded, her silence more damning than any words she could have spoken. She held out her cuffed hands, and the younger officer quickly, almost reverently, unlocked them. The freedom from the steel bracelets was a small relief in a sea of lingering humiliation. The sergeant turned on Miller, his voice dropping to a low, venomous growl that was meant for him alone but was still audible to the nearest cameras. "What in God's name were you thinking, Miller?" he hissed. "You saw her credentials. You had a dozen people telling you that you were wrong." Miller, stammering, tried to defend himself. She fit the description, her attitude, she was being deceptive. His excuses sounded pathetic and weak, the desperate rationalizations of a man caught in an undeniable act of bigotry. The sergeant cut him off. "She was a black woman in a nice suit, and you couldn't handle it. That's what this was." The blunt assessment, coming from his own superior, was a brutal public indictment. The facade of procedure had been ripped away, exposing the raw prejudice that had fueled the entire encounter. The institutional response was swift and decisive. "Miller, you are relieved of duty, effective immediately," Sergeant Peterson commanded, his voice now ringing with the full authority he had failed to exercise earlier. "Give Officer Reyes your service weapon and your badge, now." The public stripping of his power was a stunning reversal of fortune. With trembling hands, Miller unholstered his pistol and handed it over, butt first. He then unclipped his badge from his uniform, the small piece of metal that had given him so much power, now just a meaningless object. He looked like a man hollowed out, his identity erased in a matter of seconds. The sergeant pointed to the patrol car Maya had just vacated. "Get in the back. You will wait there for the captain." The irony was absolute. The man who had illegally detained a federal agent was now a prisoner in his own vehicle, a spectacle of his own making. Just as Miller was being secured, a black sedan with government plates pulled up, and a man in a sharp suit, Maya's direct supervisor, Assistant Special Agent in Charge Mark Thornton, emerged, his face a mask of controlled fury. He strode directly to Maya, his eyes scanning her for any sign of injury before turning to Sergeant Peterson. "Sergeant, your officer just committed a felony by unlawfully detaining a federal agent," Thornton stated, his voice dangerously calm. "This isn't an error in judgment. This is a federal crime, and it will be treated as such. The Department of Justice will be in contact." The arrival of the FBI officially transformed the scene from a local police blunder into a full-blown federal incident. The city, the department, and especially Officer Miller were no longer just facing a civil rights complaint. They were facing the full weight of the United States government. Maya watched the scene unfold, a strange sense of detachment settling over her. She was no longer the victim in handcuffs. She was the catalyst for a chain of events that would now move with unstoppable momentum. The arrival of her supervisor provided a shield, a professional buffer against the lingering personal sting of the ordeal. Yet the victory felt deeply unsettling. She had been saved not by the system itself, but by her status within it, a status that Miller had refused to see until it was forced upon him. She looked at the crowd, their phones still held high, their faces reflecting a mix of shock and righteous anger. They had been her only allies when her badge meant nothing. The fight was far from over, but in that moment, as the institutional wheels of accountability began to grind, she knew that Officer David Miller's career of unchecked racism had finally come to a definitive and public end. The digital deluge began less than an hour after Maya was released. The first video, shot from a coffee shop window, showed the entire confrontation with startling clarity. Her calm professionalism, the glint of her gold FBI badge, and Officer Miller's sneering dismissal. Within hours, a dozen more angles appeared online, a multi-perspective mosaic of injustice. Hashtags like #BadgeMeantNothing and #Justice for Agent Evans trended globally. The raw audio captured every word: Miller's baseless accusations, Maya's steady recitation of her credentials, and the crowd's growing outrage. Her humiliation, once confined to a single city block, was now a shared experience for millions, replayed and dissected in an endless loop of clicks and shares. The videos were not just evidence, they were a verdict delivered by the court of public opinion, and the judgment against Officer Miller was swift, universal, and unforgiving. The official response was a study in contrasts. The city's police department issued a vague, passive-voiced statement about an ongoing internal investigation, a boilerplate response that only fueled the public's fury. The mayor's office was silent for a full day, a political paralysis that spoke volumes. In stark opposition, the Department of Justice released a terse, powerful statement confirming Special Agent Evans's impeccable 15-year record and announcing a full federal civil rights investigation into both Officer Miller and the department's patterns and practices. Support for Maya poured in from every corner. The NAACP and ACLU condemned the incident as a textbook case of racial profiling, while law enforcement associations from across the country issued statements distancing themselves from Miller's conduct, praising Maya's restraint as a model of professional de-escalation under extreme duress. With the full backing of the FBI and a top-tier civil rights law firm representing her pro bono, Maya filed a sweeping lawsuit. The complaint named not only David Miller, but also Sergeant Peterson for his failure to intervene, and the city itself for fostering a culture of impunity that allowed officers like Miller to flourish. The lawsuit sought $2.1 million in damages for unlawful arrest, emotional distress, and the profound violation of her civil rights. It was more than a claim for compensation. It was a legal assault on a broken system. Maya, an agent who had spent her career building cases brick by brick, now found herself as the central exhibit in a case that would put an entire police department on trial. She approached it with the same meticulous resolve she brought to her FBI investigations, determined to dismantle the institutional rot that had allowed her public humiliation to happen. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was a revelation. Maya's attorney successfully petitioned the court to unseal Officer Miller's personnel file, and what they found was a damning chronicle of unchecked bigotry. Over his 12 years on the force, Miller had accumulated 17 civilian complaints for racial profiling and 4 for excessive force, nearly all of them filed by black citizens. The pattern was undeniable. He consistently targeted minorities in wealthy, predominantly white areas, initiating stops on the flimsiest of pretexts and escalating encounters with aggressive, accusatory language. The department had dismissed every single complaint, often without interviewing key witnesses, burying a clear and dangerous pattern of misconduct under layers of bureaucratic indifference. The file was not just evidence against Miller, it was an indictment of a department that had willfully ignored a predator in its ranks for over a decade. Faced with irrefutable video evidence, a mountain of prior complaints, and the looming threat of a federal investigation, the city's attorneys knew a trial would be a public relations and financial catastrophe. They couldn't risk putting a decorated FBI agent on the witness stand to recount her ordeal in front of a jury. The pressure was immense, and they quickly moved to settle. After a brief negotiation, the city council approved the $2.1 million settlement, one of the largest in the city's history for a single plaintiff profiling case. The agreement included a public, written apology to Agent Evans and a commitment to enact new training protocols on racial bias and de-escalation. While the money was a formal acknowledgement of the harm done, for Maya, the true victory was in the public admission of fault and the forced promise of systemic change. The final act of David Miller's career played out not on the street, but in a sterile administrative hearing room. Stripped of his defenders and exposed by his own actions, he was a diminished figure. The police chief, reading from a prepared statement, officially terminated his employment for gross misconduct, violations of departmental policy, and conduct that brought the entire force into disrepute. He was stripped of his pension, and his name was immediately forwarded to the National Decertification Registry, ensuring he could never again wear a badge and carry a gun in any jurisdiction in the country. The system, which had protected him for so long, had finally, irrevocably, cast him out. David Miller walked out of the building a civilian, his identity as a police officer erased, his reputation destroyed, a walking symbol of how quickly a career built on prejudice can be dismantled by the truth. The dust settled, but for Special Agent Maya Evans, the world never quite returned to its original alignment. Professionally, her reputation was not just intact but enhanced. She became a quiet symbol of integrity and resilience within the Bureau. Yet emotionally, a subtle but permanent crack had formed in the foundation of her faith in the system she served. The $2.1 million settlement sat in a trust, a cold and impersonal acknowledgement of a wound that money could never truly heal. Sometimes, while sitting in her office overlooking the city, she would catch her own reflection in the window and see not just a federal agent, but the woman in handcuffs, her authority erased by the color of her skin. The victory was real, the accountability was satisfying, but it was a bitter triumph, a painful reminder that her badge had only protected her after the fact, not during the moment it was most needed. She often thought about the invisible architecture of her own survival in that encounter. It was a perfect storm of privilege that saved her: her status as an FBI agent, her years of de-escalation training, the presence of a crowd in a wealthy downtown district, and the undeniable power of a dozen smartphone cameras. But for every story like hers that ends in a multi-million-dollar settlement and a disgraced officer, there are thousands that end in a silent, unrecorded humiliation or worse. She thought of the countless black men and women stopped on lonely roads in poorer neighborhoods without the shield of a federal badge or the witness of a viral video. Their stories are dismissed, their complaints buried, their trauma absorbed into the fabric of a society that too often chooses to look away. Her case was not proof that the system worked. It was proof of what it takes to force the system to work for just one person, just one time. In the wake of the public firestorm, the city was forced to act. The Evans Mandate, as it was unofficially called by the media, was a package of reforms pushed through by a city council desperate to repair its image. It included a strict 3 strikes policy, where any officer receiving a third substantiated racial profiling complaint in their career would face automatic termination. Body camera footage for all civilian interactions became non-negotiable, with severe penalties for officers who failed to activate their devices. The Training Academy revamped its curriculum, incorporating implicit bias and procedural justice modules designed by civil rights experts. These were tangible changes, concrete steps written into policy, born directly from the public humiliation Maya had endured on that downtown street. But the question lingered in the minds of activists, community leaders, and Maya herself. Was it enough? Are policy changes a cure for the deep-seated prejudice that allowed a man like David Miller to wield a badge for 12 years, accumulating 17 complaints without consequence? New rules can govern actions, but they cannot legislate away the hatred or fear in an officer's heart. The reforms were a start, a crucial and hard-won beginning, but they were not the end of the fight. They represented a fragile truce in an ongoing war for the soul of American policing, a war that would be won not in a single lawsuit, but through constant vigilance and an unwavering demand for true accountability at every level. This victory was a single battle, not the end of the war. The changes in Maya's city were a direct result of public pressure, fueled by people who saw the injustice and refused to be silent. But what do you think? Should an officer like Miller be fired after the first substantiated complaint, or is a 3-strike rule fair? Was the $2.1 million settlement enough to compensate for the public humiliation and violation of her rights? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you believe that accountability is non-negotiable and that stories like this need to be heard, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with others. The system doesn't change on its own. It changes when the public shines a light so bright that it can no longer hide its failures in the dark.